Hello everyone, very good morning and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So before we take up the discussion for today, let's look at a very important announcement. Our online English batch for the evening slot has begun from 28th of Feb. Those interested can give us a call at this number which has been provided over here. So with this, let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at the topics that we are going to discuss today. These are the important articles that I have chosen from the Delhi edition of The Hindu. Today we have 7 important articles, 3 articles which are extremely important for mains that require a detailed analysis, and 4 small articles that are important from a prelims examination point of view. So let's discuss these articles one by one and let's ensure that it's a comprehensive, detailed discussion. The idea is to ensure that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. So if you guys are benefiting from these initiatives, why don't you comment below, press the like button, and without fail, subscribe to our channel. So let's begin with the discussion by looking at this important column on page number 6. This column, written by Stanley Johnny, is examining India's position over the Palestinian issue. Since the Gaza war has been raging, and India has been quite vocal about its views about the ongoing conflict, the writer is examining India's historical position over the Palestinian question. Because of late there has been some concern that whether India's position on Israel-Palestine issue has been changing. So the writer tries to address this question by examining India's historical position with regard to the Israel-Palestine conflict and how our policy has evolved over the years. So let's carry out a detailed analysis because this topic can be very, very important for your mains exam under international relations. So let's start with the beginning of the Israel-Palestine conflict and let's talk about India's position starting right from 1947. In one of the previous classes, I had explained the historical background to the Israel-Palestine conflict. We understood the origin of the Zionist movement in Europe, which gave a call for the creation of a Jewish state in the middle of the historical Palestinian region. How the Zionist movement was backed by British through the Balfour Declaration. This is something that we have discussed in one of the previous classes. So as the region, the historical Palestinian region, came under the British mandate following the First World War, Jews from across Europe started migrating back towards Jerusalem, which now in modern times, in medieval times, was historical Palestine. So in modern and medieval times, this was the homeland of the Arab Palestinians. But the Jews who had been driven out from this region over centuries since ancient times, now they were making a comeback under the call given by the Zionist movement. So as Jews started migrating back towards historical Palestine and started settling down in Palestinian territories, it triggered clashes and conflicts between the Jewish settlers and the native Palestinians. Obviously, there was a communal angle to it. The Zionist movement was about creating a Jewish state, and the Palestinians, who were all Arab Muslims, were opposing the Jewish settlements that were taking place. The colonial interference, the imperial attitude of Britain and even United States after the Second World War, in a way encouraged the Jewish settlements, and it triggered a direct clash between Arab Palestinians and the Jewish settlers. So after the Second World War, the only viable solution to end this conflict was to provide for a partition, to provide for a two-state plan. The United Nations, which had just been established after the Second World War, came out with a two-state plan, essentially a partition plan, to partition historical Palestine into a Palestinian state and a separate Jewish state called Israel. So this is what the UN had proposed. As you can see here, the Palestinian state would account for just 45% of the landmass of historical Palestine, whereas 55% of the territory was supposed to be the Jewish state of Israel. So when this UN plan was proposed, initially India was against it. India opposed the two-state plan initially, and you can see the list of countries over here which voted against the two-state plan. Several countries took a stand against it because this was on ideological grounds. In 1947, India had just become independent. We had gone through the horrors of a communal partition. So there was no way that India could accept and even support a similar communal division and partition on religious lines. In fact, then Prime Minister Pandit Nehru compared the two-state plan and the Zionist movement of some of the radical elements with the divisive agenda of the Muslim League in India, which led to a communal partition of the Indian subcontinent. So India and many other former colonies, British colonies, they all rejected the two-state plan. They saw this as a colonial imperial enforcement on the region, because there was no way that India and other countries could accept the forceful creation of a Jewish state in the middle of historical Palestine. That too, creating two states on the lines of religion was completely against India's ideological principles, as India itself had suffered through the horrors of a communal partition. So on these ideological grounds, India took a stand against communal division. India took a stand against colonial imperial enforcement. And as a result, India did not support the two-state plan, meaning India's support was not in favor of a Jewish state. India wanted this region to be a Palestinian state, as historically the region was a Palestinian land, at least in medieval and modern times. So India and many other countries, which all shared a similar ideology, they all voted against the two-state plan in 1947 when the plan was proposed by the United Nations. So what does this mean? This means that initially India's support was entirely for Palestine, with no recognition for Israel. It was not just India, but many other countries, many other former colonies, right? They all took the same stand. They opposed the two-state division. They opposed any religious partition. And India stood with the Palestinian cause and rejected the creation of Israel. But after this, in 1948, Israel unilaterally declared independence. Israel broke the two-state plan. It violated the UN plan. And it went against international law and declared unilateral independence in 1948. So as Israel declared independence in 1948, several Arab countries, they came to the support of Palestine and declared war against Israel. Because according to the two-state plan, the idea was to create a Jewish and a Arab state simultaneously, parallelly, very similar to how India, Pakistan were created almost on successive days. But Israel, with the backing of Britain and United States, broke the two-state plan, violated the solution, and it never gave space for the creation of a Palestinian state. Israel declared unilateral independence. And if you compare the two maps, you can even see the radical changes in territory that has happened. As per the two-state plan, these green shaded areas were supposed to be the Palestinian state. Right? 45% of this region was supposed to be Palestine, with 55% of the region being Israel. But as you can see, there is a drastic change in a couple of years in the map of this region. That is because as Israel violated the plan and declared unilateral independence, many Arab countries declared war against Israel. The neighbors, such as Egypt, Jordan, which was then known as Transjordan, Syria, Lebanon, all these Arab Muslim nations, with the support of other Arab countries, they declared war against Israel to support the Palestinian cause. But surprisingly, Israel defeated most of the Arab powers. But Egypt managed to capture Gaza, the Gaza Strip, which you all read about in news today, where the conflict is going on. It came under the control of Egypt initially in 1948. This region of Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, which was supposed to be the capital of a Palestinian state, and this region of West Bank came under the control of Jordan. And other areas that you see here, these Palestinian territories, which were supposed to be Palestine, they were all occupied by Israel. So what we saw was Israel expanding its territory even further after the 1948 war. Even though some Palestinian territories like Gaza and Jerusalem came under the control of Egypt and Jordan, rest of Palestinian territory was occupied by Israel, thus leading to the expansion of the territorial control of Israel. So in 1948, when Israel declared independence in violation of the UN plan and it snatched the right of Palestinians, India took a stand again against Israel. India did not officially recognize Israel because this was unlawful. This was against the two-state plan. It was against the UN proposed plan. And this was the violation of the rights of Palestinians. So initially, when Israel was created, when it became independent on its own, India did not give recognition to Israel and stood firmly with the Palestinian cause. But later, geopolitical reality took over. By 1950, Israel had become a reality. Many countries had started recognizing Israel, even though Palestine was never created, even though Palestinian land was now occupied by Israel and other countries. So with this new reality, India also changed its position. And finally, India gave recognition to Israel in 1950. 2 years after Israel's independence, that is when India gave recognition to the state of Israel. Until then, India did not look at Israel as an independent country. So this showed the evolving policy of India. As the geopolitical circumstances and the regional developments were taking place, India's position on Israel and Palestine also has evolved. Initially in 1947, we opposed the two-state solution. We opposed the partition. We opposed the very creation of Israel initially on ideological grounds, which was a valid viewpoint of India in that given circumstance. In 1948, we did not recognize Israel initially, which was again valid from India's viewpoint, because Israel's creation was against international law. Palestinian right had been snatched away and India could never support that. But as the realities changed by 1950, India went ahead, evolved its policy and gave recognition to Israel. We recognize Israel as an independent state. But however, India did not establish relations with Israel. Official diplomatic relations were not established until 1992. Even though we recognized Israel as an independent state, we did not set up official ties with Israel until 1992. This was again largely due to India's constraints. As India was dependent on West Asian powers and Arab states for oil supplies, we could not risk angering the West Asian powers like Saudi Arabia, UAE and others, which were critical for oil supplies to India, which were crucial for India's energy security. So if India had established ties with Israel back in, let's say, 1950s or 60s or 70s, this would have angered the Arab states and probably oil supplies could have taken a hit, thus affecting India's energy security. Plus, India had very close ties with the Arab countries. So India couldn't risk its ties with Arab nations and at the same time try and set up ties with Israel. Both were conflicting objectives for India. And as a result, for almost 4 decades, India did not set up any ties with Israel. So throughout this period, we continued our ideological support for the creation of an independent Palestine. Not just India, most of the world, majority of the countries in the world, they kept supporting the Palestinian cause, meaning they would support the two-state plan, as this was the only viable plan, the viable solution to ensure that both Palestinians and Jews and their rights are protected. Now that Israel was created, now that Israel became a reality, it was only rightful and just for Palestinians to have their state as well. Because, of course, it was Palestinian land which was snatched away to create Israel. So most countries, majority of them, they constantly backed the creation of Palestine, and India's position was also exactly the same. So we recognize Israel without official diplomatic relations, but our support for Palestine continued. And at the United Nations, every single time, India supported the two-state plan, and we have continued backing the creation of a viable Palestinian state. However, by 1968, due to changing geopolitical realities, India-Israel started coming closer secretly. Since India couldn't officially set up ties with Israel without angering the Arab states and without risking our energy supplies, under the Indira Gandhi government in 1968, India went ahead and set up a covert relationship with Israel. The intelligence agencies of both the countries, India's RAW, which had been recently set up in 1968 by Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, would set up security relations, intelligence and military relations with Israel and its intelligence agency, the Mossad. So India's RAW and Israel's Mossad would start secretly collaborating to share intelligence, to deal with common security threats. And Israel even started providing military support to India secretly to help modernize India's armed forces. So this covert security defense relationship continued throughout 70s, 80s and 90s. Finally, after the Cold War came to an end in 1991, the Cold War divide ended with the collapse of the Soviet Union. The global geopolitical realities were changing. And by then, many Arab countries themselves had made a secret peace with Israel, especially after the oil crisis of 1970s and after the rise of Iran as a Shia conservative power. The other Sunni Arab states like Saudi Arabia, UAE and others, they all aligned with Western countries such as US, because they had a common enemy right now, which was Iran, a Shia power. So most of the Sunni Arab powers, they aligned with US, and naturally their interests were merging together. Their oil and energy interests, their geopolitical interests to target Iran, right? They were all merging together by 1979, 1980, and this led to a secret peace between some of the West Asian powers and Israel. So this made it easier for India as well. If UAE, Saudi Arabia and other Arab states were secretly having a peaceful relationship with Israel, then it wouldn't stop India as well. The same concern, the constraints weren't there anymore on India. So in 1992, India also went ahead and established official diplomatic ties with Israel in 1992. Now then PV Narasimha Rao government used this opportunity and immediately opened official ties with Israel. But just because we opened ties with Israel doesn't mean we'll give up our support for Palestine. Even after setting up ties with Israel, even after the relations grew, India has maintained its consistent ideological support for the creation of a Palestinian state. See, over the years, these boundaries have undergone a lot of changes. After the 1948 war, the first Arab-Israel war, the boundaries had already changed. But then 2 decades later, there was a second conflict in 1967, also popularly referred to as the 6-Day War. The Arab countries made a second attempt to attack Israel and to liberate Palestinian territories. So Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, these neighboring countries, these Arab states, with the support of other Arab Muslim nations across this region, they attacked Israel again, leading to the 6-Day War or the 1967 war. During this conflict, Israel not only defeated the Arab states quite convincingly, but it further expanded its territorial control, and now it occupied most of the Palestinian territory as well. Remember, I told you earlier, in the 1948 war, Egypt had captured Gaza. But during the 6-Day War in 1967, Israel captured Gaza from Egypt. Not just Gaza, Israel also captured Sinai Desert, the strategic Sinai Peninsula, from Egypt. So this gave Israel full leverage on Egypt, and the US mediated between them through the Camp David Accords, which led to the signing of a peace treaty between Israel and Egypt. The US acted as a mediator, and the Camp David Accords were signed, as a result of which Egypt recognized Israel and ended its hostility with Israel. In return, Israel gave back the Sinai region to Egypt. The Sinai Peninsula, which was occupied by Israel, was returned back to Egypt. But Israel occupied Gaza and continued to hold its control over Gaza. Israel even gained full control of West Bank region, including Jerusalem. It had pushed out Jordan. It defeated Jordan, captured all of Jerusalem, including East Jerusalem, which was supposed to be the future capital, of a Palestinian state. This is as per the UN plan. Right? So all these areas, including East Jerusalem and West Bank, came under Israeli occupation. Right? And Israel even captured the strategic Golan Heights that you see here from Syria. Syrian territory was captured, and even today, Israel remains in occupation of Golan Heights. Israel remains in occupation of most of the Palestinian territories as well. So when these changes were taking place, India was always critical of Israel's aggressive steps. India would support the right of Palestinians to have their own country. Even after we established ties with Israel in 1992, we have continued backing the creation of a viable Palestinian state. In fact, what we support today is the creation of Palestine with 1967 borders. That is the borders that prevailed before the war, before the 6-day war, which means West Bank territory that you see here in the map with East Jerusalem and Gaza. These territories are supposed to be the Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. This is what India and many other countries support even today. We support the creation of Palestine with the 1967 borders before the 6-day war. So this has been an ideological stand that India has maintained over the last 30 years as well, even after our relations with Israel has grown exponentially. I'm sure all of you know that since 1992, India's ties with Israel has improved by leaps and bounds. Israel has become one of the largest suppliers of military hardware to India. It has supplied advanced defense technology to India. We have very close security, intelligence and defense relations. We have a good economic and trading relationship as well. There are many Indians who work in Israel, right? And also in many areas of technology, be it agriculture, healthcare, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, water desalination. In all these critical areas, India and Israel have a very good working relationship. So even though our relations have grown, even though we share a strategic close partnership with Israel, we still maintain our commitment, our ideological commitment for the creation of Palestine. That is something which has remained a constant in India's foreign policy. This is also a display of India's independent foreign policy. Just because we support Israel, we have good ties with Israel, doesn't mean we will give up our ideological commitment to the creation of Palestine. And this policy has remained consistent in India, irrespective of the government in power or the party in power, be it the Congress, be it the BJP or a coalition government. Our policy towards Israel and Palestine has remained quite consistent. There were concerns recently that India's approach to the issue is changing under the Modi government. There were concerns when India abstained from voting against Israel at some resolutions. See, Israel is often accused of carrying out large-scale human rights violations against Palestinians whenever there is a crisis or a conflict in the region, especially when extremist outfits like Hamas, right, and previously if any Palestinian militant organizations, if they launched attacks against Israel, Israel would often retaliate with brutal force. It would use disproportionate force, where many civilians would also get killed. And as a result, Israel was accused of using disproportionate force, and every now and then it would face charges of human rights violations and war crimes at the UN Human Rights Council. So when these votes came up, previously in the 1990s and early 2000s, India was voting against Israel. Even though we had a friendly partnership, a good relationship, including a strategic military defense partnership, India would vote against Israel on the question of human rights violations. Right? So that was the position of India. But this position had changed of late under the Modi government. Instead of voting against Israel, India had started abstaining from these votes. Prior to 2020, if you look at some of the votes at United Nations, UN Human Rights Council and other international platforms, where Israel was accused of war crimes and human rights violations, India was not voting against Israel anymore, but it was abstaining from these votes. Now, some of the experts and analysts, they interpreted this as the changing policy of India. This was interpreted as a pro-Israel, anti-Palestine policy. But however, the Modi government has ensured that the balance of India's policy is maintained, and that is very evident from the fact that Prime Minister Modi visited Palestine. When he recently paid a visit to Israel a few years ago, along with stepping up India's defense economic relations with Israel, Prime Minister Modi also visited Ramallah, which is the administrative capital of Palestine today, where the Palestinian Authority is headquartered. So PM Modi visited Ramallah and promoted our ties with Palestine as well. India's ties with Palestinian Authority is actually very good. We provide a lot of funds and assistance as well for Palestinian refugees. So this has shown the balance in Indian relationship with Israel and the Palestinian cause. Even though some experts were critical that India's position was changing, that we were becoming pro-Israel and anti-Palestine, this has been proven as untrue by the Modi government as the policy has evolved. There is a finer policy that you see where Prime Minister Modi visited Ramallah and continued the ideological support for Palestinian state. And this policy is at clear display ever since the brutal attack that Hamas carried out on October 7th. Last year, on October 7th, Hamas carried out a major terror attack against Israel. Almost 1,200, 1,300 Israeli civilians were killed. Following which, Israel has launched a war against Hamas, and it has created a massive humanitarian situation in Gaza. Millions of Palestinians have been displaced, and the shocking fact is that more than 30,000 Palestinian civilians have been killed. So India's balanced policy is at complete display over the last few months. If you look at India's stand on what we said about the terror attack, what we said about Israel's war against Hamas, what we are currently saying about the situation in Gaza, what India has done for Palestinians, if you look at these developments, you will clearly understand the balanced approach of India. On one hand, we are continuing our close ties with Israel on issues which are critical. We back Israel, but without compromising on our commitment for the Palestinian cause. For example, when the attack took place on October 7th, India stood firmly with Israel against the terror attack. India did not hesitate to call this a terror attack. We labeled this as a terror attack. It was indeed nothing but a terrorist strike on Israel. If any extremist group is killing thousands of civilians in a mindless act of violence, it accounts for an act of terrorism. And accordingly, India labeled this as an act of terror and said Israel has a right to defend itself against terrorism, because India itself is a big victim of terrorism. But however, there's something very interesting. Till date, India has never labeled Hamas as a terror group. India has not designated Hamas as a terrorist organization. See, we have a law which is our primary anti-terror law, that is the UAPA, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. Under this law, India can designate terrorist organizations. So several terror groups, especially Pakistan-sponsored outfits, the Khalistani outfits, Northeast insurgent groups, the Maoist outfits, they're all listed under this act. They're proscribed or designated as terrorist organizations. But Hamas is not officially designated by India as a terrorist group. Why? Because many countries, they still look at Hamas as a Palestinian liberation movement, as a revolutionary liberation movement, because there is a complex history behind this conflict. Of course, you can criticize the methods that Hamas has been employing, right? The brutal violence, the mindless killings it has carried out. But given the complex history and the complex nature of this conflict, many countries don't look at Hamas as a terrorist organization. And even India has not called Hamas as a terrorist outfit, not even once. We are very careful in the statements that we use. We call this attack as a terror attack, but we haven't labeled Hamas as a terrorist organization. We ourselves have not designated Hamas under UAPA as a terrorist outfit. Is that clear? Even though India supported Israel against this act of terrorism, even though we supported Israel to defend itself against terrorism, we have been critical of Israel's methods in Gaza. Over the last 4 or 5 months, right, Israel has been using massive force in Gaza, even in West Bank as well. It has carried out multiple airstrikes. It has carried out a full ground invasion into Gaza. The 2.3 million Palestinians who reside in Gaza, right, they are already at the hands of great suffering, because from decades, Israel has placed a blockade on Gaza. There is a complete air, land and sea blockade, which has cut off Gaza, and it has turned Gaza into the world's largest open-air prison. So following this war, right, millions of Palestinians have been pushed into the southern corner towards Egypt, towards the Rafah border crossing, and they have been struggling to even get basic aid, basic relief material. There is a shortage of food, shortage of medicines, shortage of healthcare, and Israel has been known to attack hospitals as well, as Hamas has built terrorist tunnel networks under hospitals and under the Gaza city. So in this ongoing war between Israel and Hamas, Palestinian civilians have been suffering, and more than 30,000 Palestinian civilians have been killed. So the human cost of this war, which Israel has imposed on Gaza, is enormous. Most countries, most experts agree that this is one of the biggest human tragedies of the century, and yet Israel is not being held accountable for the crimes it is committing against Palestinians. And India is not silent as well. India has been quite open of late in condemning Israel's disproportionate use of force. See, if you look at the global position on what is happening in Gaza, there are two stark contrasts that you can see. On one hand, Israel is getting unconditional support from US and to an extent from European powers as well. That has been their traditional position. Irrespective of what happens, US and some European countries have constantly backed Israel, and especially the US provides military and economic aid to Israel to even target Hamas and other Palestinian extremist organizations. But please remember, US and European countries also support the two-state plan. Even they support the creation of Palestine. Even they see the creation of Palestine as the only viable solution to resolve this conflict in West Asia. So this is one extreme where Israel has allies like US which unconditionally support Israel, and if any resolution is brought against Israel accusing it of human rights violations, the US will support Israel and defeat those resolutions. So on one hand, Israel gets complete support from allies like United States, even though they support the Palestinian cause. On the other extreme end, you have countries like South Africa and Brazil. You have countries like South Africa, Brazil, many Arab states and some European states as well, which have targeted Israel and they have accused Israel of committing a genocide against Palestinians. Recently, for example, South Africa has filed a case at the International Court of Justice, alleging that Israel is committing a genocide and violating the Genocide Convention. Brazil's leader, Lula da Silva, he made a public statement saying that Israel is carrying out a genocide against Palestinians because it has killed almost 30,000 plus Palestinians. Right? It is systematically crippling the delivery of humanitarian aid as well. It is preventing the supply of food and medicines and continuing its war, which is resulting in a human tragedy. So many countries have taken a stand and they are dragging Israel to various international platforms, accusing it of committing a genocide and human rights violations. So that represents the other extreme. So India's position is somewhere in between these two extremes. We are not giving unconditional support to Israel like US. India is not so blind as US and some European countries to ignore the human tragedy that Israel is committing. At the same time, we are not as extreme as South Africa, Brazil and others to label this as a genocide and to target Israel with charges of genocide and human rights violations. India's position is somewhere in between, and this was very evident yesterday when India issued a statement on a major situation that happened in Gaza a couple of days ago. In northern Gaza, there was a recent development where Israeli armed forces have committed a massacre. This has created global outrage. More than 100 innocent Palestinian civilians have been killed when they were rushing to receive food aid and medicines. There was a lot of chaos, people running around. It was a very chaotic situation where Israeli forces assumed that the Palestinian mobs were a threat. They opened fire. They have killed more than 100 Palestinians, injured more than 700 Palestinians. This human tragedy, this event is being called as the Gaza massacre. Many countries are calling for action against Israel, asking answers from Israel. Even European countries like Germany, France, even United Kingdom. Most of them are demanding answers from Israel as to how can such an incident happen, right? Where Palestinian civilians were trying to receive aid. And how could the armed forces open fire against an unarmed civilian group? So India also has issued a statement, and this gives us the answer as to what is India's position on Israel and Palestine. India has expressed shock and complete concern about the attack on Gaza civilians. India has condemned this act of violence, this massacre, and India has stood firmly with Palestinian civilians, and we have quite openly condemned Israel for its actions in Gaza. Just a few days ago, a couple of weeks ago, the Munich Security Conference was hosted in Europe, in Munich, in Germany. India's Foreign Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, was one of the dignitaries who was invited as a speaker at the Munich Security Conference. So when he was asked a question on the Gaza conflict and on India's position, Dr. Jaishankar, he said that Israel should have exercised caution while dealing with civilian population. He openly said that Israel is responsible for civilian deaths. It should have been careful about the civilian population while using disproportionate force. This is probably the strongest condemnation that has come from India with regard to Israel's actions against Palestinian civilians. So that shows that neither India is completely blindsided by Israel. We are not blind to the human tragedy it is causing in Gaza. At the same time, we are not risking our ties with Israel. We want to maintain a strategic relationship. It is beneficial for India. We have our core interests in building this relationship. At the same time, we have not given up our ideological commitment for Palestine. Whenever there is a humanitarian situation, India condemns that violence. India has stood with Palestinian civilians and even condemned Israel, and recently we have abstained from many votes. We have voted against Israel as well. For example, there was a UN resolution calling for a ceasefire. Israel does not want a ceasefire. It wants to continue the war, irrespective of the human cost. But India stood for the ceasefire. We voted for the resolution, which put pressure on Israel to call for a ceasefire. So that shows that India's policy has evolved, of course, over a period of time. But we maintain this consistent balance between Israel and Palestine. Even though we have good relations with Israel, we maintain our ties with Israel, we support Israel against terrorism, we will not stand with Israel if it's committing human rights violations. We will not stand and just ignore the human tragedy which is happening. India has condemned this quite openly. So that shows that the Modi government also has continued the policy of balancing both Israel and Palestine. So that is what we take away from this important article. And also see, this is more in India's interest. The balanced approach is in India's interest. We can't blindly stand with Israel and ignore its violations in Gaza, because it will affect our ties with Arab countries as well. Even if you ignore the human rights angle, let's say you are very realistic, very pragmatic in foreign policy, you ignore the values of ethics, morality, etc. Right? If you are very cold-hearted, if you're just looking at it as a strategic relationship, even then it doesn't make sense to blindly support Israel. Why? Because it might compromise our critical relations with Arab countries, which are right now up in arms against Israel. No Arab country will stand with Israel right now. Even Saudi Arabia, UAE and others, which have decent relations with Israel, at least unofficially, Saudi Arabia and Israel have a secret relationship. UAE and Bahrain, they signed the Abraham Accords in 2020 and gave recognition to Israel as well. They set up official ties with Israel. But even they are criticizing what's happening in Gaza. So India will risk relations with Arab countries, with all the Muslim countries in this region, if we blindly stand with Israel. So strategically as well, it makes sense to not blindly support Israel and stand with Palestinians as well. But India is not doing this just because of a strategic selfish motive. India is doing this because we have an ideological commitment towards the Palestinian movement, towards ensuring that a viable Palestinian state is created with 1967 borders and East Jerusalem as its capital. I'll give you one more example if you want. A few years ago, when Donald Trump was a president of US, he brought up a controversial proposal. He wanted to give recognition to Jerusalem as Israel's capital. And he tried shifting the US embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Every country criticized this, including India. India voted against Israel and US in this resolution at the UN, and we did not recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital, because East Jerusalem is supposed to be the capital of Palestine, not Israel. So that again shows that the Modi government itself has taken a stand against Israel when it matters, and we have stood with Palestine on critical issues. So this is the evolved, balanced position of India, where we are maintaining good relations with Israel, but we will not stand and just watch when Israel commits a human tragedy against Palestinians. Similarly, we will not give up our ideological commitment to ensure the creation of a viable Palestinian state. Plus, we also have major economic interests. There are major shipping routes that pass through this region. Recently, the IMEC corridor has been proposed to connect India, Middle East and Europe. These corridors, these economic projects can never be realized if West Asia is destabilized. You already know how the war in Gaza has spread across West Asia and destabilized the whole region. You have the Houthi rebels backed by Iran carrying out attacks in Red Sea, disrupting shipping. There are other Iranian-backed proxy militant groups carrying out attacks across the region that has destabilized West Asia. And this is not good news for India. Because destabilization of West Asia could hit oil supplies to India. It could hit our economic relations, not just with West Asia, but with other countries as well, because we rely on these shipping routes and trading routes. So it makes absolute sense for India to not stand blindly with Israel and not support what Israel is doing. While we support Israel to defend itself against terrorism, right? India cannot simply stand and ignore the human rights violations Israel is carrying out. So that is very clear from the statement India has made, right? Recently, the foreign minister also has said that Israel should have been mindful of the civilian casualties. India has expressed shock about the Gaza massacre, and it has called for a thorough investigation and inquiry by Israeli authorities as to what happened. So we may not be as extreme as South Africa, Brazil and others in calling it a genocide, right? But again, that shows our balanced position, because we want good ties with Israel as well, while protecting Palestinians, while supporting the right of Palestinians. So that is the nuanced, balanced position of India on this complex issue related to West Asia. So this could be a very, very important topic for your mains exam. So this article can help you write a very good answer on this particular topic. So before we look at the next article, please look at the special classes that we have for today. There are 4 special classes by Abhishek sir, Asta ma'am and Mukesh sir. These are the topics, the timings are provided, and the links for these special classes, which are held on the Unacademy app, the links are provided in the video description below. Now let's look at the next column from page number 6, which is from Indian polity. This column examines the viability of death penalty or capital punishment in India. The writers are talking about the frequency with which our lower courts, especially the trial courts, the frequency with which they sentence the convicts to death punishment, and how easily they provide death penalty in every other case. So this raises the validity of capital punishment. It raises questions about the viability, the legality, constitutionality of capital punishment as well, right? And whether India should continue having capital punishment as part of its criminal justice system. See, of course, capital punishment in India is legal and constitutional, right? Because we have laws that provide adequate backing for death penalty. We also have the Constitution of India under Article 21, which guarantees fundamental right, that is right to life as a fundamental right under Article 21. But however, there is a reasonable restriction on your right to life. The state has the authority to take your life by following the procedure established by law. And there are certain criminal laws for certain heinous crimes and criminal offences where the courts can deliver the death punishment, the death penalty, or also what we call as the capital punishment. But as civilization has evolved, as we move towards more progressive modern societies, questions have come up over the validity, the viability of capital punishment. Many countries have moved away from this brutal retributive system. They have adopted more reformative forms of justice, and many countries have even completely abolished capital punishment altogether. In India as well, there is an inclination towards relying less on death penalty and death punishment, because there are many issues associated with this form of punishment. So that is what we are going to examine in this article, because the writers are pointing out that in 2023, 561 prisoners were convicted by the lower courts and they were delivered the death penalty. This is the highest number of death punishments awarded since 2004. In 2 decades, this is the highest number of death punishments that have been awarded to convicts. See, these criminals who have been accused, right, they have been charged, they have been held guilty and convicted, they have been prosecuted at lower courts, right? So, with a little bit of certainty, we can say that in most cases, there is enough evidence to prosecute them, convict them, to hold them guilty, and the lower courts have given them the death penalty as the punishment. Now the question is, do all the convicts deserve the death penalty? Do they really deserve the death punishment? That is the question. Because in 20 years, this is the highest number of death penalties awarded. That was in 2023. See, recently the Supreme Court had made an intervention with regard to death sentencing. The Supreme Court in 2022, in the Manoj case, it placed a restriction on trial courts when it comes to awarding the death punishment. The Supreme Court observed that in almost every other criminal case, lower courts were inclined towards awarding the death punishment. In many cases, when these death penalty rows reach the higher courts, when it reaches High Court or Supreme Court, they are often commuted to a life sentence. If the punishment can be delivered, if justice can be delivered through other forms of punishment, then why provide the death penalty? That has been the motive of the Supreme Court as well. So in 2022, 2 years ago, in the Manoj case, the Supreme Court placed a restriction on the trial courts when it comes to awarding death penalty in every other case. The Supreme Court said, trial courts have to look into the background, the antecedents, the environmental factors, the surrounding factors of the accused, which would have contributed them in committing that heinous crime. There might be a murderer, a rapist, they might have committed heinous crimes. But is death penalty the only punishment? That's what the Supreme Court asked in the Manoj case. If they don't deserve the death punishment, if there is any factor related to them which doesn't validate the death penalty, then trial court should not be delivering the death sentence. That is the restriction the Supreme Court placed, that trial courts have to collect more information about the accused, their upbringing, their societal background, their environmental background, other factors which contributed to their inclination towards committing a crime, right? Their socio-economic conditions, everything should be factored in before really considering the death penalty. Which means the Supreme Court was saying that don't provide death punishment for every heinous crime, right? Because that is not the way forward, because death penalty has a lot of issues which we are going to discuss. So despite this restriction placed by the Supreme Court, it was a constitution bench that placed this restriction in the Manoj case, but still trial courts continue to provide death punishment in large numbers. 561 convicts have been placed on death row, right? In fact, last year in 2023, when death row cases reached the Supreme Court, in 55% of the cases, the convicts were acquitted, meaning they were not even held guilty by the Supreme Court, which means there were flaws in the investigation by the police. There were flaws in the prosecution by the state prosecution. There were flaws in the judicial process itself followed by the trial courts, the lower courts. In more than 50% of the death row cases, Supreme Court has not just commuted the sentence, it has acquitted the guilty or the convicts, meaning they never committed the crime. Rather, there was no evidence enough. There wasn't enough evidence to link them with the crime that was charged against them. There were quite a few cases that reached the Supreme Court last year, and in majority of them, Supreme Court acquitted the convicts. It cleared them of all the charges. That shows to what extent death penalty can be misused by lower courts. How easily we can lead to derailment of justice if the police, if the prosecution and the courts are not doing their job. So that is where the question comes up, should we have capital punishment in the country? Now, if you look at capital punishment in India, it is absolutely legal, constitutional, as I told you, because Article 21, which gives you the fundamental right to life, it's not an absolute right. Your life can be taken by the state by following the procedure established by law. There are laws like the CRPC, which is now being replaced with a new law, right? And there are other criminal provisions as well that deal with some heinous forms of crime, like heinous murder or rapes, right? Sexual offences against minor children, right? So in such specific cases where heinous crimes are committed, death punishment or death penalty is provided in our criminal justice system. It is seen as a form of justice to the victims and to the society as well. But however, even though it's legal and constitutional, it is a highly debated matter. There is a constant debate around the validity of capital punishment, right? Even its imposition is not always done. Even if death sentence is provided by lower courts, right, most of them will be set aside by the High Court or the Supreme Court itself. If the case goes to appeal, which it will, High Courts and Supreme Courts often set aside the death punishment, they commute the sentence to life sentence because they feel that the punishment is enough through life sentence. Death punishment need not be delivered because there is a doctrine which the Supreme Court has laid down, the rarest of rare doctrine. Supreme Court has urged the lower courts, including the high courts, to use death penalty as a last resort. Provide death punishment only in the rarest of rare cases. Of course, this is very subjective doctrine. There is no clear definition of what constitutes rarest of rare, but at least it's a guiding principle, a guiding doctrine that aids the courts to decide on death punishment and provide death punishment only in the rarest of rarest crimes. Only where very heinous crimes have been committed with a premeditated motive, right? Only when it really shocks the conscience of the country, when a particular crime shocks the nation itself with regard to its seriousness and gravity of the crime. Only in such heinous and grave crimes, the courts have to use the death penalty as an option, right? So despite this doctrine being present, it's not always followed because this is very subjective, right? The Supreme Court has not exactly defined what constitutes rarest of rare. But lower courts have this tendency to keep delivering death penalty in almost every other case, in every other case of murder, rape, etc. But most cases, when they reach the high courts and Supreme Courts, they are completely squashed. The guilty, they are even released, they are acquitted due to lack of evidence. To begin with, either the police would have failed in their investigation, they might have made up some evidence, false evidence, prosecution could have brought some false witnesses, or the trial courts would have failed to follow the clear process of justice, the principles of natural justice. So based on that, usually high courts and Supreme Courts, in most cases, they acquit the criminals entirely. If they are held guilty again by high courts and Supreme Court, either they will commute the sentence to life sentence instead of death penalty, or only in few cases death penalty has been upheld. Then it finally reaches the President of India, who has the power to pardon death row prisoners as well, right? Then the government will have to decide whether the punishment has to be pardoned by the President of India. So President of India has the pardoning powers under Article 72. So in India as well, the government has shown a kind of moratorium. In the last 30 odd years, we have executed only few death penalties, very few. Hardly in 4 cases since 1995, death punishment has actually been implemented. Recently, for example, Ajmal Kasab, the terrorists involved in the Mumbai attacks of 26/11, and Afzal Guru, involved in the parliament attacks of 2001. So these two terrorists were the recent convicts who were delivered the death punishment, where it was executed. But otherwise, most other cases, they drag for years and years. Even the pardon application that the death row prisoners would have filed, right? It drags for years. The government doesn't take a decision because there is a general sense of moratorium when it comes to using death penalty, as it is seen as a very grave form of justice which is provided. But there are many proponents, many supporters who argue in favor of capital punishment. Those who support capital punishment, they say that death penalty is needed. It provides justice to victims, especially when heinous crimes are committed, when a gruesome murder is committed, or when a grave rape incident has taken place, right? It is argued by the proponents of death penalty that death penalty serves as a form of justice to the victims. It provides justice, a sense of closure to the victims and their families. They also argue that death penalty can be a deterrent against future criminals, against future cases of heinous crimes. They argue that it sets an example, it sets a precedent. It will scare away any future criminal who might commit such gruesome murders or heinous rapes. So they see this as a deterrent tool, and they also see this as a form of retributive justice, where retribution is taken by the society, by the state, against the criminal, which gives the emotional satisfaction to the society, right? They support capital punishment, believing that retributive justice and emotional satisfaction is enough to do justice to the victims and their families. They believe that it gives them a sense of closure, and it also acts as a deterrent against heinous crimes. But there is a very strong argument against it. The only thing served through death penalty, according to many experts, is that it only provides you that emotional satisfaction. Just a satisfaction that some convict has been put on death row and he has been delivered the death penalty, and that gives a sense of closure. Apart from that, it's nothing but retributive justice. But today, right, human civilization has evolved from these ancient medieval methods. In fact, if you look at death penalty itself as a form of punishment, this has been present since age-old times, since ancient times. If you look at Greeks, Romans, or any other civilization, even in India, right, any empire, death penalty has been a form of punishment, a mode of punishment, but this is largely seen as retributive, meaning you're seeking revenge against the criminal, where the society is paying for the blood of the criminal, right? But today we have evolved, we have become civilized. Today we have the rule of law, democratic principles in place, and there is a general sense in many countries as well that the state should never have the right to take someone else's life. That is why many countries have even abolished death penalty. Because in today's civilized world, the focus is on reformative justice, not retributive justice. Seeking retribution, seeking that emotional satisfaction of punishing a criminal with death is a medieval tactic, it's a medieval method. In modern times, you can't justify retributive forms of justice. That is the argument against capital punishment. Today's focus in a democratic constitutional state, where there is rule of law, right? The focus is on reforming the criminal, giving the criminal a chance to reform themselves, irrespective of what crime they have committed. If they have committed the most heinous crime, then deliver the life sentence, keep them in jail for their entire life. There's nothing the state or society will gain by delivering the death penalty to them. It's only retribution, it's only giving you that emotional satisfaction, which is not the sign of a civilized society. Right? So that is the argument against capital punishment. And more importantly, studies have clearly established, there is empirical data to prove that death penalty has no deterrent value. If that was the case, then we would be living in a crime-free world since ancient times. Right? Since humans figured out death penalty as a form of punishment thousands of years ago, right? If few criminals were given the death punishment, that would have acted as a deterrent, preventing future humans from committing similar crimes. But that is not the case. Even if when you have death penalty, murders keep happening, rapes keep happening, heinous crimes, they will be committed. It has no deterrent impact of any sort. There is no validity, no justification to this argument that death penalty will act as a deterrent. This has been disproven. Right? So also, majority of countries have abandoned capital punishment. If you look at progressive European democracies, most of them have done away with capital punishment. Today, death penalty remains in very, very few countries. And unfortunately, India is one of them. But India has some company here. We have United States, China, and many authoritarian, dictatorial countries where death penalty prevails even today. For example, if you look at conservative monarchies in West Asia, like let's say Saudi Arabia, or other conservative regimes like Iran, right, in some African countries, in North Korea, it's in these authoritarian states, including Russia, China, etc., that is where death penalty remains in operation. Even in United States, India, US are standout in this crowd because these are democracies, US being one of the oldest and India being the largest, right? It's quite ironic that there are two major democracies in this list when every other country in this list includes the authoritarian conservative regime. So in US, death penalty is frequently delivered. It's implemented as well through various methods, usually through a lethal injection, through electric shock, etc. In India, it is done through hanging. But whatever be the form of executing the death penalty, it is seen as inhuman. It is seen as brutal. It is seen as retributive. Because the death row inmates, they undergo severe mental trauma. They are put through severe distress. And this is seen as inhuman. If you look at India's legal and judicial system, these cases take years and years. Right? Once lower courts have delivered the death penalty, the death row inmates, they have no idea when they might be executed. So every minute, every day, they are thinking that they might be executed next day. The case will go to High Court, Supreme Court, multiple hearings will take place. Right? Even if after all these appeals, if death penalty is upheld, let's say, then they appeal for presidential pardon under Article 72. There is no guarantee when the decision will be made by the government, because that's not a discretionary power of the president. The Council of Ministers will advise the president whether should we pardon the death row inmate or commute the sentence. These decisions take months and years, and as a result, the death row inmate and their families, they are constantly put on the hook. They don't know when the execution might happen, and it puts them through severe mental trauma and distress. In India, there is already a huge backlog of cases, right? Our judicial system moves very slowly. So given that fact, putting more and more prisoners and criminals on death row sentence and making them go through years of trauma is simply inhuman in today's modern civilized world. That is why there are many strong critics who take a stand against capital punishment. And that is exactly what the writers are saying as well. The writers are pointing out that trial courts have this habit of frequently dishing out death sentences. As I told you last year, more than 500 death sentences have been delivered. Trust me, in none of them or in majority of them, they will never be executed. Right? In most cases, those convicts will be acquitted either by High Court or Supreme Court, because to begin with, the cases would have been flawed. All right? We have seen that happening in many, many cases. High courts are very reluctant to confirm the death sentence. This is very evident from the data available. In majority of the cases, High Court itself will set aside the death sentence and commute that to life sentence. Last year, there was only one case where the High Court upheld the death sentence. Only one case. Supreme Court as well, in majority of the cases, will not uphold the death sentence. In most cases, it has commuted the sentences to life sentence or life punishment in jail instead of providing the death penalty. So that shows that the Supreme Court and High Courts are very cautious, very careful. They do try to enforce the rarest of the rare doctrine. But trial courts are not doing that. Even though Supreme Court has mandated this, even though it established few restrictions in the Manoj case of 2022, trial courts are not following it. Supreme Court had asked the Manoj case, Constitution Bench had asked, before delivering death sentence, collect more information about the accused. Look at their background, look at their social and economic and environmental factors which might have contributed. But trial courts are not doing it. Even without basic information about the accused, they have mindlessly applied their judicial mind and delivered death penalty in most cases. When these cases reach appeal stage at High Court and Supreme Court, most cases will fall apart. So that is the concern being pointed out by the writers. So throughout this duration, the death row inmates are put through severe agony, mental trauma and distress, which is simply inhuman. Data shows that 4.9% of the death sentences imposed by trial courts were confirmed at the appellate level. Let's round it off to 5%. So let's say trial courts had delivered death penalty in 100 cases. Only in 5 cases it is upheld at the High Court or Supreme Court. Meaning in 95 cases, either they are acquitted entirely or it is commuted to a life sentence. Majority of the death cases before the court have resulted in the court upholding convictions but commuting the death sentence to life imprisonment. As you can see, High Court and Supreme Courts have felt that enough justice can be done, punishment can be delivered just through a life sentence. Death penalty need not be provided. Looking at all the circumstances of the case, High Court and Supreme Court have ruled that death sentence is not necessary to punish the convict or to deliver justice to the victim. Justice can be done to the victims, to the society as well, while punishing the criminals only through life imprisonment. Death penalty is not needed. In majority of the cases, commuting has been done. Commutation has been provided by High Courts and Supreme Courts. This clearly points to a systemic failure in our criminal justice system. To begin with, police fail in their investigation. They don't apply the right scientific methods. They might even try to create false witnesses. Same with prosecution. And trial courts don't apply the rarest of the rare doctrine. Right? They're more than happy to deliver death sentences in every other case. And that is why we are seeing so many cases where prisoners are being put on death row. So that is the core point of this article, and the writers take a clear stand against it. And they are urging the Supreme Court to put an end to this practice. They're also calling for a wider debate. Whether should we have capital punishment in India? Right? Should we abolish it like other countries? So that is the bigger question that they are raising. Now coming to the next article, on page number 6 and 12, we have an editorial and a very important article on page 12 that is relevant for economy and as well as for internal security. There is one article which is the editorial in today's paper dealing with Enforcement Directorate or ED, also called Directorate of Enforcement. We have another article dealing with Financial Intelligence Unit India. Now these are two very important security agencies of India. So let's understand what is their role, what is their mandate, and what's the controversy related to the ED or the Enforcement Directorate, which is being discussed here in this editorial. So let's talk about this and end the discussion on the mains articles and quickly move on towards the prelims articles. The ED or Enforcement Directorate is a law enforcement agency. It's a central law enforcement agency responsible for implementing the Prevention of Money Laundering Act and the Foreign Exchange Management Act. The ED is the nodal law enforcement agency to deal with money laundering. Money laundering is an illegal process through which black money is converted into white, through which illegal wealth is converted into legal wealth. And it also deals with foreign exchange violations, forex violations. Both are criminal offences under PMLA and FEMA respectively. So the job of ED is to tackle money laundering under Prevention of Money Laundering Act and to deal with forex violations, foreign exchange violations under the Foreign Exchange Management Act. So under the PMLA, the ED has been given an enormous power. It has authority over all money laundering cases. It exercises almost exclusive jurisdiction and a natural jurisdiction on all money laundering cases in the country, wherever money laundering is involved, be it a drug smuggling case, a case of terrorist financing, or a case of any illegal activity where the illegal wealth has been laundered, right? So those money laundering cases will come under the jurisdiction of ED. Now this is in line with the standards of FATF, Financial Action Task Force. FATF is a global body, an intergovernmental body that implements anti-money laundering and counter-terror financing measures. To tackle money laundering and terrorist financing, which are connected, the FATF has laid down certain international standards, and according to these FATF standards, every country should have a national law that criminalizes money laundering. So in India, we have the PMLA, which criminalizes money laundering, declares it as a criminal offense, and we have created two institutions as recommended by FATF to deal with money laundering cases. The FATF has recommended that there should be a Directorate of Enforcement, meaning there should be a separate dedicated law enforcement agency to deal with money laundering cases. FATF also recommends a separate intelligence agency, a financial intelligence unit, to collect intelligence about suspicious transactions and financial activity in the banking and financial system. And it recommends the creation of FIU in every country. And that is exactly what India has done. We have abided by FATF standards, the global standards, by passing the PMLA. Right? Through PMLA, we have declared money laundering as a criminal offense. We have provided full powers to ED, Enforcement Directorate, to enforce the provisions of PMLA. So as recommended by FATF, ED has the powers to confiscate the proceeds of the crime. Whatever proceeds have been procured through money laundering, whatever illegal assets, be it illegal wealth or black money or real estate, stocks or any luxury assets which are procured through illegal methods with involvement of money laundering, all such proceeds of crime can be confiscated by the ED and it can attach them to the ongoing case. This is a tremendous power which is provided to ED as per the recommendations of FATF. In fact, India's PMLA law has gone beyond what FATF has recommended. The ED has powers to even carry out arrests, search and raids, sometimes without a warrant as well. In certain specific cases, as per the recent amendments which were done to PMLA in 2019, there were few amendments done to PMLA which provides even more powers to the ED. It has become a very powerful agency of the center. It even has the powers to carry out search, raids and arrests, and in some cases it can do that without a warrant. It has been given exclusive jurisdiction as well in certain cases, which makes ED one of the most powerful law enforcement agencies today. And this is where a concern comes up. There are reports, there are allegations that the ruling party at the center often misuses central agencies like ED to target opposition leaders and state governments, especially states ruled by opposition parties. For example, this editorial here is dealing with a sand mining case in Tamil Nadu. As you know, illegal sand mining is an offense, but this is dealt with by the state police. Any illegal sand mining cases, it comes under the jurisdiction of the state police. So Tamil Nadu government, Tamil Nadu police will deal with it. But in one particular illegal sand mining case, ED has stepped in. ED also has claimed jurisdiction because according to the ED, the proceeds of sand mining was laundered. The money was laundered, and there is a money laundering angle to these cases. So ED has summoned the district collectors from few districts of Tamil Nadu, and this has been objected by the Tamil Nadu state government, right? Because it creates a center-state friction. The Tamil Nadu government is alleging that the center is only misusing ED to target the state government because it's ruled by an opposition party. It's alleging that the ruling party at the center is misusing this law enforcement agency. In fact, this criticism has come up not for the first time. There have been many such cases in the past as well. There have been hundreds of raids conducted by ED in the last few years. And in most cases, conviction has not happened. Conviction rate is very low. In fact, ED's track record has been very poor in that regard. Many experts also point out that despite conducting hundreds and thousands of raids, the conviction rate of ED under PMLA cases is very low, which means ED has either failed to collect enough evidence or to begin with, it was not a genuine case. So the low conviction rate is seen as a pointer, as a possible evidence, which backs up the claim that central government is misusing ED to target opposition leaders, opposition parties, and state governments. So that is the issue being explored in this editorial. Now coming to the FIU, the Financial Intelligence Unit India. This is an intelligence agency as mandated by FATF. The task of FATF is to provide these global standards, right? And India has obliged by most of the standards. We have incorporated that into our law, which is the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. So to keep a check on all the records and accounts in the banking and financial system, to enforce the record keeping, account maintenance standards on banks, on financial institutions, non-banking finance companies, we have a dedicated intelligence agency called FIU. The Financial Intelligence Unit keeps a check on any suspicious financial activity. It keeps a check on the back end of the banking and financial system. It coordinates with all the banks, with regulatory authorities like RBI, SEBI, with all the financial institutions as well, to flag any suspicious transactions and financial activity which could be connected with money laundering. So it is an intelligence agency generating intelligence, whereas ED is a law enforcement agency, and both of them deal with money laundering. So this is as per FATF recommendations. So FIU is in news because it has acted against Paytm Bank. As you know, Paytm Bank has seen a major scandal, right? Its banking license has been suspended by RBI because it has not followed due diligence. It has not followed the KYC norms, right? These KYC norms are critical to know your customer, to identify the customer who is banking with a particular bank, who are conducting transactions in the economy. This is how authorities can prevent fraudulent transactions and money laundering activities. But Paytm Payments Bank has breached the KYC norms, right? It has been flagged by FIU for facilitating illegal transfers, illegal financial transactions which were involved with money laundering as well. And it has levied a fine on Paytm Payments Bank. It has imposed a fine on Paytm Bank. So that is why FIU was also in news. So it's very interesting that both ED and FIU are in the news on the same day. So please pay attention to the topic. It can be very important for both your prelims and even for your mains. Now let's head towards the prelims section, look at the small articles, and then close the session for today. We have this article on page number 4 that refers to the leopard census. Just like we have a tiger census conducted once in every 4 years. Similarly, a leopard census is also conducted, and the report was recently published. The Status of Leopards India report. This article is specifically talking about the leopard population in Odisha. Right? Odisha has seen a sharp decline in leopard population in the last few years, mainly because of poaching. Due to poaching, leopard population has declined in the state of Odisha, and there is a significant drop. The population has come down to just 568 leopards. So that is the concern expressed by this article. But however, for your exams, for your prelims especially, the leopard census itself can become very important. See, the Indian leopard is a threatened species. It is listed as vulnerable on the IUCN Red List. It's a vulnerable species and it's listed as a threatened species here. So recently, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change has released the data of the latest leopard census. The 5th cycle of leopard population estimation was done and the Status of Leopards India report was published a couple of days ago. This census was conducted by National Tiger Conservation Authority or NTCA along with the Wildlife Institute of India. Please make a note of this. The fact can be very important for your prelims. NTCA, which administers the tiger reserves, which implements Project Tiger, which also leads the tiger census, is involved in leopard census as well. Because if you know, tiger habitat is shared by leopards as well. The two big cats, they share the same habitat and they are seen as competing predators as well. They are rivals of each other. Tiger and leopard clashes are quite frequent. The only difference is that tigers are restricted to the deeper forests. They don't usually venture into human habitations, but leopards are more versatile. They are more adapted. They are found in outside of protected areas. Since they face a direct competition with the tiger, right, and they almost have the same prey base, they try to avoid conflicts and confrontation with tigers. They often move out of the core areas, and that is why they are found on the fringes of a protected area. And sometimes if there isn't enough prey or food, leopards tend to move out into human habitation, into nearby villages or sometimes even into cities. You might have read about news reports where leopards have entered cities like Nagpur, Nashik, Bengaluru, etc. And as a result, cases of human-leopard conflict is very high. And this is a big risk to the species. The man-animal conflict issue, as leopards are more adapted to visiting villages and cities and moving around populated areas, right? The species is more prone to man-animal conflict incidents, and that could result in the death of leopards as well. So the leopard census data provides a positive report. There has been an 8% jump in India's leopard population. From around 12,852, it has jumped to around 13,874. So in the last 4 years, we have seen a 8% jump in the leopard population of the country, and this is the distribution provided over here in this map. Please take a look, be familiar with the range of leopards and which states have the highest leopard population. There can be a factual prelims question on this. The state with the highest leopard population is Madhya Pradesh. So leopards are primarily found in open grasslands that you find in central and eastern India. They are also found in Western Ghats and Eastern Ghats. They are found in northeast region, in the Brahmaputra Gangetic region as well, in the Shivalik ranges of Himalayas as well. So this is the range where leopards can be found in India. So Madhya Pradesh has the highest population, followed by Maharashtra and Karnataka. Then comes Tamil Nadu. But there is one state which is of concern, that is Uttarakhand. Uttarakhand has reported a 22% decline in leopard population, and in most cases it is because of increased man-animal conflict situations, as a result of which leopards have been killed. Right? Also, poaching is another risk factor. So poaching and man-animal conflict are the two important reasons behind the decline of leopard population in Uttarakhand. But interestingly, tiger population has gone up in Uttarakhand. In the latest tiger census published last year, right, Uttarakhand's tiger population had gone up. So experts are also thinking that maybe there is greater competition between tigers and leopards that could also be playing a role in the decline of the leopard population. So remember this, Uttarakhand has seen the biggest drop in leopard population. The fact is important for your prelims. Whereas Arunachal Pradesh, Assam, West Bengal, they have seen a 150% rise in their leopard population. Now coming to the region-wise distribution, the highest distribution is in central India, followed by Eastern Ghats, Western Ghats, Northeast region, Brahmaputra plains. These are the areas with highest population, and they have seen an increase in their population. But the Gangetic plain and Shivaliks, they have seen a decline. They have seen a decline. So please remember this trend, this region-wise trend. So Gangetic plains and Shivalik has seen a decline in leopard population, but central India, eastern India, northeast and Brahmaputra region, and eastern Ghats and western Ghats, they have seen an increase in their leopard population. Next, we have a related article on page number 6. The Union Cabinet has approved the establishment of the International Big Cat Alliance, or also being called as IBCA. This is the Indian initiative. Just like we set up the International Solar Alliance to tap solar energy, right? And we brought more than 120 countries together to promote collaboration in the domain of solar energy. Similarly, India is promoting international collaboration to conserve the big cat population of the world. The big cats of the world includes tigers, lions, leopards, snow leopard, pumas, jaguars, cheetahs, etc. These are the 7 big cats distributed around the world, and India has 5 of them. Except for puma and jaguar, except for these 2, the other 5 big cats are found in India. Tigers, lions, leopards and snow leopards and cheetah. Right? So India is home to 5 of the 7 big cats. So last year, PM Modi announced this grand international initiative. Last year, we marked the 50th anniversary of Project Tiger. And while announcing the Tiger Census data, Prime Minister Modi announced the launch of the International Big Cat Alliance. Today, almost 96 countries in the world, they are home to the big cat population. At least one of the 7 cats is present in 96 countries. So India has proposed a collaboration between them to focus on habitat species conservation to protect the 7 big cats. Already 16 countries have shown interest. 16 countries are all set to sign the International Big Cat Alliance, and India will be hosting this alliance. The institution will be headquartered in India, in New Delhi, and the cabinet has approved 150 crores for the next 5 years as budgetary support to establish the International Big Cat Alliance in India. It will be headquartered in India. 16 countries are going to join this initiative, and we would like to expand this. We would like to bring all the 96 countries which are home to the big cats, and the membership is open to other countries as well which don't have a big cat population. If they're interested in playing a positive role to contribute to international collaboration, right? Every country is welcome to join the initiative, but focus is on the 96 countries which are home to at least one of the 7 big cats. So this is an important global environmental initiative led by India. Next, on page number 8, we have an important update about India-Sri Lanka relations. See, recently, Sri Lanka had proposed solar and wind renewable energy projects at 3 strategic islands located over here between India and Sri Lanka. Here you can see the coastline of Tamil Nadu. This is Rameshwaram here. This is the Jaffna region of Sri Lanka, the Jaffna Peninsula. So right off the coast of Jaffna, there are 3 important islands, Sri Lankan islands. This includes the Delft Island, Nainativu and Analaitivu. So please remember the names of these 3 islands. These 3 islands, which are present off the coast of Jaffna, right, they were in news over the last 2 years because Sri Lanka was planning solar, wind, renewable energy projects over here, and it had awarded the contract to a Chinese company. A Chinese company was supposed to execute offshore wind turbines and build solar projects over here, which is very, very close to India's coastline. So when this project was announced, and when it was announced that China will be leading this project, a Chinese company will be executing it, this caused alarm in India. India's strategic establishment saw this as a security threat, a strategic threat, because we couldn't afford a major Chinese project and Chinese involvement in these 3 important islands which are so close to the coastline of Tamil Nadu. India has some critical infrastructure on the coastline. So given the proximity of these 3 islands to India, India opposed the project. India even offered an alternative. India said, instead of taking a loan from China, China was funding this project on a loan. India said, don't take this loan, we will provide you a grant. Grant need not be repaid. Grant is basically like a gift. India said, we will provide you a grant for this project if you give the project to an Indian company. And thankfully, because of the changing developments in Sri Lanka has become very dependent on India as a result of the recent economic crisis. And it is India which has bailed out the Sri Lankan economy with almost $4 billion worth of assistance. So as a result, Sri Lanka has cancelled this Chinese project. It has dropped the Chinese company from this key project, and now it has awarded this to an Indian company. A Bengaluru-based company has signed a contract yesterday to execute this power project, this renewable energy project at the Delft, Nainativu and Analaiativu Islands, which are very close to India's coastline near Rameshwaram. So please be familiar with the names of these islands, their locations, and why it has been in news with regard to India, Sri Lanka and China relations. Now coming to the last article for today. On page number 12, we have a very important update with regard to the ongoing crisis in the Red Sea. Till now you have heard about the Houthi rebels of Yemen carrying out attacks against commercial ships passing through Red Sea. You have heard about Houthis attacking ships in Arabian Sea as well, disrupting shipping across West Asia region, which is affecting India and many other countries. Now there is another disturbing development. It is still unconfirmed as to what exactly is the reason behind these developments, but there is a disturbing development which has come to light. In the last few days, the undersea submarine cables, which are absolutely critical for digital communication, they have been deliberately cut and destroyed in the Red Sea. 3 major submarine cables have been cut, which is very crucial for India as well, and this could disrupt our internet traffic. I don't know how many of you know this. Majority of the internet that we all connect to, it is present underwater. I've seen many people have a wrong assumption that internet is largely satellite based. It's not. Satellite based internet is just taking off. It's just a very small scale, a small share of the market. Most of the internet, the global internet that connects different continents and regions, it is all present underwater through submarine cables that are laid under seas and oceans, right? So here in this map, you can see the submarine network, the undersea cable network that connects India with rest of the world. These are like your national highways, or it's like your international shipping lanes, which provide connectivity. If roads and shipping lanes create physical connectivity, these submarine cables are creating virtual connectivity. So India, for example, is connected with West Asia and Europe and even Africa with important submarine cables passing over here. They all land at Mumbai. Mumbai is a major submarine landing point where all these internet cables land at Mumbai, which connects India with largely the Western world. Similarly, Chennai is another major submarine landing point. There are multiple underwater cables that start from Chennai, connecting us with Southeast Asia and East Asia and the Pacific, including Australia. All right. There are few submarine cables starting from Kochi as well. Now, these are the virtual lifelines of India. This is what connects India to the outside world. And 3 such important cables to the west of India in Red Sea have been cut. They have been sabotaged. This is not because of a natural accident. It is established by now that this has been because of an act of sabotage. So most likely the suspicion is falling on Houthis, or it could be a state actor as well. So it could be connected to the ongoing Gaza conflict and the larger crisis in West Asia. So one critical cable, the Asia-Africa-Europe 1 cable that connects India with West Asia via Red Sea and Europe, this cable has been cut. Along with that, the Europe-India Gateway cable, another critical cable passing through Red Sea, also has been cut over here. And there is another private submarine pipeline, which is from Tata Group. The Tata Communication Global Network has another submarine cable. So this disruption to internet services is already imposing a cost on India. India's internet service providers like Reliance, Airtel, Tata and others, they're all switching to other backups and redundant systems to ensure that we continue having access to the internet. But if the crisis continues and if we see more such attacks on submarine cables, this could cut off India from West Asia and Europe, which could have a devastating economic consequence, not just on India, but the whole world. So this is of great concern, and we still wait for further clarification, further information about what exactly or who exactly caused this damage to these critical submarine cables. So on this note, I bring my detailed discussion of today's The Hindu to an end. and I want you to take a look at these practice questions for your mains answer writing practice. Please use them for your answer writing practice. Write your answers and post them in the comment section below. With this, we bring the session to an end. I hope you guys have liked it. I hope you have understood all the key topics we have discussed. Now, trust me, you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. The whole purpose of the session, right, the reason why we even extend to 1 hour 15 minutes, 1 hour 25 minutes is because to ensure that we cover every topic comprehensively with all the background, with all the linkages, right, so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. So I hope you agree with us. I hope you benefit from these initiatives. And if you do, please press the like button. Let me know what you think in the comments and do subscribe to our channel. That is it for today. I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Have a good